When media mogul Oprah Winfrey thought she could silence rising star Karoline Leavitt, she had no idea what was coming next. Leavitt just dropped irrefutable proof that exposes Oprah's darkest secrets. And the backlash was so explosive, it got her canceled. This story is unfolding live, but what we've uncovered so far will shock you. And trust me, you won't believe how it ends. Watch till the final reveal, because this changes everything. The room was tense, the air thick with anticipation. Karoline Leavitt sat across from the interviewer, her posture rigid, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. She had spent months preparing for this moment, gathering evidence, verifying sources, and steeling herself for the inevitable backlash. But now as the cameras rolled, there was no turning back. She took a deep breath, her voice steady but laced with emotion. For years, Oprah Winfrey has been held up as a beacon of hope, a self-made billionaire who overcame adversity to become one of the most influential women in the world. People trust her. They believe in her. But what if I told you that trust has been built on lies? The interviewer leaned in, eyes wide. What do you mean? Caroline exhaled sharply, as if the weight of her knowledge had been crushing her for too long. I mean that Oprah Winfrey is not who she claims to be. Behind the smiles, the philanthropy, the carefully crafted public persona, there's a darker truth. And today, I'm going to expose it. She reached into a folder beside her and pulled out a stack of documents, her fingers trembling slightly. This isn't speculation. This isn't hearsay. This is proof, undeniable, irrefutable proof, that Oprah has been manipulating the public for decades. The first document she revealed was a confidential internal memo from Harpo Productions, dated over a decade ago. It outlined a deliberate strategy to control narratives surrounding certain guests on the Oprah Winfrey Show, including scripting emotional breakdowns for higher ratings. They called it emotional engineering, Caroline said, her voice dripping with disgust. Oprah's team handpicked vulnerable guests, people who had suffered trauma, abuse, loss, and then coached them on how to cry on cue, how to deliver their pain in the most dramatic way possible. This wasn't about giving them a voice. It was about exploiting their pain for profit. Next, she produced emails between Oprah and a high-profile Hollywood producer discussing how to handle a former employee who had threatened to go public with allegations of workplace harassment. The emails suggested hush money and legal intimidation to keep the story buried. This is just the tip of the iceberg, Caroline continued, her tone growing fiercer. I've spoken to former employees, people who worked behind the scenes at Harpo, at OWN, at her charity organizations. They've told me stories of bullying, coercion, and systemic cover-ups. Stories that would shatter the image of the Queen of Kindness if they ever got out. She paused, letting the gravity of her words sink in. Then, with deliberate slowness, she pulled out one final piece of evidence, a recorded phone call. This, she said, holding up the recording device, is Oprah's voice, unfiltered, unscripted. This is what she really thinks of the people who made her famous. She pressed play. A familiar voice filled the room, Oprah's, but the tone was cold, dismissive, almost mocking. They'll believe anything if you cry on camera, the voice sneered. These people don't want truth. They want a show. The recording ended. The silence that followed was deafening. Caroline looked directly into the camera, her eyes burning with conviction. This is the real Oprah Winfrey, the woman who built an empire on the backs of broken people, the woman who pretends to care while laughing at the very audience that worships her. And I'm not going to let her get away with it anymore. She leaned forward, her voice dropping to a near whisper. This is just the beginning. By the time I'm done, the world will see Oprah for who she really is. And trust me, you won't believe what's coming next. The screen faded to black, but the shock lingered. The bombshell had been dropped, and there was no taking it back. Karoline Leavitt sat back in her chair, letting the weight of her first revelations settle over the audience. The initial bombshell, Oprah's private contempt for her fans, had already sent shockwaves through the room. But now it was time to dive deeper. She reached for a second folder, this one thicker, filled with documents that had been carefully compiled, verified, and protected for months. What I just showed you was damning, Karoline admitted. But what I'm about to reveal, this is the evidence that proves Oprah Winfrey didn't just manipulate her audience, she silenced those who threatened to expose her. The first document she pulled out was a settlement agreement stamped with the Harpo Productions legal seal. The name of the plaintiff had been redacted, but the details were horrifying. This is from a former producer on The Oprah Winfrey Show, Karoline explained. She filed a sexual harassment complaint against one of Oprah's top executives. Instead of investigating, Oprah's legal team offered her a six-figure payout, on the condition she never speak about it again. She flipped to another page, an email chain between Oprah and her legal team. In it, Oprah had written, "Handle this quietly. We can't afford another scandal before the OWN launch." This wasn't an isolated incident, Karoline continued. I've obtained 7 similar settlement agreements, all involving harassment, discrimination, or wrongful termination. Every single one of them was buried under NDAs. Oprah didn't just protect predators in her company, she paid to keep their victims silent. Next, Karoline revealed a series of production notes from The Oprah Winfrey Show. The notes, marked for internal use only, contained directives to guests, scripted emotional beats, suggested pauses for tears, even instructions on when to break down for maximum impact. This wasn't authentic storytelling, Karoline said, her voice sharp with disgust. This was emotional manipulation. Producers would identify vulnerable guests, often people who had suffered abuse, addiction, or loss, and then coach them to perform their trauma in the most dramatic way possible. She held up a signed affidavit from a former guest, a woman who had appeared on the show years ago to discuss her recovery from domestic violence. She was told, "If you cry when you tell the story, it'll get more attention, maybe even a book deal." So she did. And afterward, Oprah's team ghosted her. No follow-up, no resources, just exploitation for ratings. Then came the most explosive allegation yet. Karoline pulled out tax filings from Oprah's Angel Network, her now defunct charity. The documents showed that less than 30% of donations actually went to charitable causes. The rest was funneled into administrative costs, including luxury travel, high-end fundraisers, and even salaries for Oprah's close friends. This wasn't philanthropy, Karoline said, shaking her head. This was a tax shelter disguised as goodwill. And while Oprah was jet-setting on donor money, the people she claimed to help were left with nothing. Finally, Karoline played another recording, this one far more chilling than the first. It was Oprah's voice again, but this time, she wasn't just mocking her audience. She was admitting to the deception. "You think these people tune in for truth?" Oprah's voice scoffed in the recording. They want a spectacle, so we give them one. That's the game." The room fell dead silent. Karoline let the words hang in the air before speaking again. "This is who Oprah Winfrey really is. A fraud, a manipulator, a woman who built an empire on the backs of the broken while laughing at them behind closed doors." She closed the folder with finality. "And this is just the beginning." Karoline Leavitt let the silence linger for a long moment before continuing. The documents had painted a damning picture, but now it was time for the human cost of Oprah's deception to be heard. "Evidence is one thing," she said quietly, "but the real tragedy here isn't just the lies. It's the lives that were destroyed because of them." She turned to a monitor behind her where the face of a middle-aged woman appeared. The woman's eyes were red-rimmed, her hands clasped tightly together as if she were bracing herself. "This is Melissa Carter," Karoline said. "She appeared on The Oprah Winfrey Show 15 years ago to share her story of surviving childhood abuse. At the time, it was hailed as one of the most powerful episodes of the season. But what really happened behind the scenes?" Melissa took a shaky breath before speaking. Shaky voice. "They told me they wanted to help me heal, that my story could inspire others. But when I got to the studio, it wasn't about healing at all." Her voice broke as she described how producers had interrogated her before the taping, pressing for more graphic details of her abuse. Voice breaking. "One of them said, 'If you cry when you talk about the worst moment, it'll really connect with the audience.' Sadly, I didn't want to. It was too painful. But they kept pushing, so I did it. And afterward, nothing. No therapy referrals, no follow-up. Just a handshake and a thanks for your bravery. Melissa wiped her eyes. Angry. For years after that, I had nightmares. Frustrated, I felt used. And when I tried to reach out to Harpo to ask for help, they ignored me. Oprah built her brand on empowering women, but she left me broken. Next, Karoline introduced a man in his 40s. Daniel Reeves, a former segment producer at Harpo. His expression was grim, his jaw set. Grimly. I worked there for 6 years, Daniel said. And what I saw, it wasn't the positive, uplifting environment Oprah sold to the public. He described a culture of fear, employees walking on eggshells, terrified of Oprah's infamous temper. Disgusted, she'd humiliate people in meetings, throw scripts. I once saw her reduce a young PA to tears because her coffee wasn't hot enough. But the worst, he said, was how they treated guests. Solemnly. We had a woman on who lost her son to gang violence. Before the taping, a producer pulled her aside and said, "When you talk about finding his body, I need you to pause right here and look down. Let the silence hang. That's when we'll zoom in for the reaction shot." Disapproving. It was like directing a soap opera, except these were real people's tragedies. Daniel exhaled sharply. Frustrated. I couldn't take it anymore. When I tried to report it to HR, they told me to think carefully about my future. 2 weeks later, I was fired for budget cuts. Then came the most surprising witness, a woman identified only as Sarah, a former close friend of Oprah's from her early Chicago days. Her face was obscured in shadow, her voice digitally altered for protection. Softly, "I loved Oprah once," Sarah said softly. "But fame changed her, and not for the better." She recounted private moments where Oprah mocked her fans, bitterly. She'd laugh about the desperate housewives who wrote her letters, calling them pathetic for thinking she actually read them. The charity work? Most of it was for PR. She'd donate just enough to get a tax break and a headline. But the most chilling revelation? Grave voice. She knew about the harassment at Harpo, knew and didn't care. Despairing. One time I begged her to help a young employee who'd been assaulted by an exec. Oprah just sighs and said, "These things happen. We'll write a check and make it go away." That's when I knew the Oprah I loved was gone. Karoline let the testimonies sink in before delivering the final, devastating piece. On screen, a video clip played. A young woman, Tasha Reynolds, who had been a guest on Oprah's show years earlier as a success story after overcoming addiction. But the woman on camera now was gaunt, her eyes hollow. After the show, Oprah's team promised me rehab, a book deal, a new life, Tasha whispered. None of it happened. I relapsed, lost everything. When I reached out for help, they blocked my number. She stared directly into the camera, tears streaming. "Oprah, you used me. You took the worst moment of my life and turned it into entertainment. And when I needed you, you threw me away." The screen went black. Karoline's voice was barely above a whisper. This is the real cost of Oprah's lies. Not just broken trust, but broken lives. The room was utterly still. No one would ever see Oprah the same way again. Karoline Leavitt let the weight of Tasha Reynolds' final words hang in the air for a long, painful moment. The testimonies had been devastating. A carefully constructed image, decades in the making, now lay in ruins. But what would happen next? The answer came faster than anyone expected. Within minutes of the interview airing, social media exploded. Oprah Exposed began trending worldwide as the first clips went viral. Then came the flood of reactions from former allies and fans. Celebrity chef and longtime Oprah friend Rachel Ray was one of the first to publicly distance herself, tweeting, "Heartbroken by these revelations. We must always stand with truth-tellers." The tweet was liked over 200,000 times in the first hour. Major sponsors began pulling out in rapid succession. Weight Watchers, whose stock price had already been struggling, issued a terse statement. "Effective immediately, we are suspending our partnership with Oprah Winfrey, pending further review of these serious allegations." Their stock plummeted 18% in after-hours trading. The real earthquake came when Apple TV Plus, home to Oprah's high-profile interview series, announced they were indefinitely postponing all future projects with Harpo Productions. Industry insiders whispered that executives were furious, having invested nearly $100 million in content deals with Oprah. But the most shocking moment came when Gayle King, Oprah's closest friend and professional confidant of 40 years, appeared on CBS this morning with visibly red-rimmed eyes. I need time to process these allegations, she stammered when pressed for comment, before abruptly cutting the interview short. The uncharacteristic display of distress sent shockwaves through media circles. Meanwhile, protesters began gathering outside Oprah's Montecito estate, their signs reading, "Pay your victims," and "Oprah's a fraud." News helicopters circled overhead as the crowd swelled to nearly 300 people by nightfall. The financial impact was immediate and staggering. Forbes estimated Oprah's net worth dropped by nearly $500 million in the first 24 hours as her business empire began crumbling. The OWN network saw viewership plummet 62% as advertisers fled in droves. But perhaps the most damning development came from an unexpected source. The National Enquirer published what they claimed were leaked emails from Oprah to her legal team, allegedly written just hours after Karoline's interview aired. "This Leavitt bitch needs to disappear. Make it happen." While the authenticity couldn't be immediately verified, the incendiary message only added fuel to the fire. As the night wore on, the calls for accountability grew louder. 3 separate law firms announced they were preparing class action lawsuits on behalf of former Harpo employees and show guests. Congressional representatives began demanding investigations into Oprah's charitable foundations. Through it all, Oprah remained silent. Her usually active social media accounts went dark. The gates to her estate remained locked. The woman who had built an empire on sharing her every thought now had nothing to say. Karoline Leavitt's final words from earlier that day now seem prophetic. "The walls are closing in, and this time, no amount of money or influence will make this go away." The unthinkable was happening before the world's eyes. Oprah Winfrey, the once untouchable queen of media, was being well and truly canceled. The world held its breath in the days following Karoline Leavitt's explosive revelations. Oprah's empire, once considered untouchable, now teetered on the brink of collapse. But the question on everyone's mind was, what happens next? Within 72 hours of the scandal breaking, 3 separate class action lawsuits were filed against Oprah and Harpo Productions. The first came from former employees, led by Daniel Reeves, the ex-producer who had spoken out. Their suit alleged systemic workplace harassment, wrongful termination, and emotional distress, citing the NDAs and settlement agreements Karoline had exposed. Legal experts predicted the case could cost Oprah hundreds of millions if proven. The second lawsuit was even more damning. Melissa Carter, Tasha Reynolds, and 6 other former guests banded together, accusing Oprah of fraud, emotional manipulation, and exploitation for coercing them into fabricated or exaggerated performances of their trauma. Their attorney, famed civil rights lawyer Ben Crump, held a press conference announcing their intent to sue for $250 million in damages. "This wasn't just a TV show," Crump declared. "This was psychological abuse disguised as empowerment. These women were used, discarded, and left to pick up the pieces of their lives while Oprah profited." The third legal blow came from the IRS and state auditors, who launched investigations into Oprah's charitable organizations after the leaked tax filings suggested potential fraud and misallocation of funds. If convicted, Oprah could face fines, asset seizures, and even jail time. Oprah's once unshakable media presence vanished overnight. OWN Network saw its ratings plummet by 73%, forcing emergency board meetings to discuss rebranding or shutting down entirely. Major distributors quietly pulled Oprah's back catalog of shows from streaming platforms, erasing decades of content in a matter of days. Even her book club picks, once guaranteed to become instant bestsellers, now flopped. Publishers scrambled to distance themselves, with several authors publicly rejecting Oprah's endorsements in solidarity with the victims. Oprah's famous friends, who had once clamored for her approval, now fled like rats from a sinking ship. Ellen DeGeneres, who had faced her own scandal years earlier, posted a cryptic tweet, "Karma always comes full circle." Michelle Obama canceled a planned interview with Oprah's magazine, while Tyler Perry, one of her closest allies, issued a vague statement about praying for truth to prevail. But the most brutal betrayal came from Gayle King. After her emotional on-air moment, she quietly removed all photos with Oprah from her Instagram and was reportedly seeking legal separation from their joint business ventures. For 7 agonizing days, Oprah said nothing. No statements, no interviews, no tearful apologies. Then on the 8th day, a single tweet appeared on her verified account. "I will be addressing these allegations soon. Until then, I ask for privacy." The vague, emotionless response only fueled the fury. Within minutes, the tweet had over 500,000 replies, most of them scathing. "Privacy. You made billions selling other people's pain. Where was the privacy for your victims? Too late. We see you now." As the weeks passed, the full scope of Oprah's downfall became clear. Her production company, Harpo, announced massive layoffs. Her magazine ceased publication. Her name was stripped from schools, charities, and awards. The woman who had once been called the most influential person in America was now a pariah. In a follow-up interview, Karoline was asked if she had any regrets. She smiled sadly. This was never about taking Oprah down. It was about giving her victims a voice. And now, finally, they've been heard. Then she leaned forward, her gaze piercing. "But let me be clear, this isn't just about Oprah. This is about every powerful person who thinks they're above the truth. This is a warning. No one is untouchable. Not even the queen of daytime TV." The screen faded to black. The story was over. But the reckoning had only just begun.